Trump Institute of Peace in D.C. tomorrow. The White House has more on the president's plan. Listen.
He will announce that member states have pledged more than $5 billion towards the Gaza humanitarian and reconstruction efforts and have also committed thousands of personnel to the International Stabilization Force and local police to maintain security and peace for Gazans.
The White House says over 20 countries will attend the meeting. The president will deliver opening remarks and give more details about the $5 billion investments. And Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says a little bit of progress was made after U.S. and Iranian delegates met in Geneva, Switzerland yesterday, but the two sides are still very far apart on some issues. She says she believes the Iranians will come back to the U.S. side with more details in the next couple of weeks.
The president has always been very clear, though, with respect to Iran or any country around the world. Diplomacy is always his first option, and Iran would be very wise to make a deal with President Trump and with this administration. He's talking to many people. Of course, his national security team, first and foremost, and you know who the members of that team are. And this is something, obviously, the president takes seriously. He's always thinking about what's in the best interests of the United States of America, of our military, of the American people. And that's how he makes decisions with respect to military action of any kind.
Trump posting on Truth Social moments ago that should Iran decide not to make a deal, it may be necessary to use the U.S., use Diego Garcia in order to eradicate a potential attack by Iran. He's referring to the British island in the Indian Ocean that's home to a U.S. military base. The U.K. recently decided to hand over control of the island to the African nation of Mauritius. Trump is opposing the handover, saying it's a big mistake and a blight to the U.K. The president continues to urge the UK not to give up the island. And joining us to discuss is Gerard Filitti, foreign affairs analyst specializing in the Middle East. He's also an attorney specializing in international law. So good afternoon, Gerard. This meeting, Board of Peace meeting tomorrow, it's going to bring together more than 24 nations to rebuild the Gaza Strip. I'm wondering, what would you like to see from this meeting? Perhaps more concrete details and timelines?
That's absolutely right. What we're looking to see is more detail in terms of a timeline and details when we can expect reconstruction to begin, what we can expect to see happen on the ground in Gaza. Because right now, the biggest problem is that even though we do have this commitment from 20 countries, even though there is $5 billion plus that's been raised for reconstruction efforts, Hamas still has its weapons. Hamas still militarily controls Gaza. So it's very difficult to see how you implement reconstruction while you still have a terrorist entity that's on the ground in Gaza.
Okay, so that's one concern. Any other concerns you might have right now about the Board of Peace, whether it can, really effectively reconstruct Gaza and maintain peace?
I think that there is good optimism that the Board of Peace can, because if you look at who is a member of it, you have most of the Middle Eastern countries that have a stake in peace and stability in the Middle East. You have Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, UAE. All of these countries are part of the Board of Peace. So they have a vested interest in calming the temperature because they don't want to see more war. They don't want to see a detriment of people or economies in the region. So they have a motivation to make sure to push through so that the people in Gaza understand that they need to be a part of this process. The biggest hindrance may be the United Nations, which is meeting tomorrow ahead of the Board of Peace meeting. So we have yet to see how the United Nations will receive the proposals by the Board of Peace.
So as you mentioned, 20 countries here in the Board of Peace, some priorities align and some perhaps may not align exactly. What is your analysis on Gaza's governance and how that might evolve with the involvement of the Board of Peace?
I think that is a key piece because we want to see a transition to a stable, more democratized Gaza, where the people have a say in who runs their country and it's not a terrorist organization. And when you do have regional actors like the Saudis, like the Kuwaitis, like the Qataris, the Egyptians and the Turks, all of whom have connections and relationships with various factions in Gaza, that is more promising that people will be able to sit down and work out a different board, if you will, a government body for Gaza that will be able to take on an increasing role in managing the affairs of that country. So there's more optimism that that can actually happen precisely because of the composition of the Board of Peace involving countries that are important in the area.
So, what do you think about the long-term outlook for this group, this Board of Peace? There are a lot of countries in it right now, but I have to bring up that a number of U.S. allies, some are major U.S. allies, not joining this Board of Peace. I mean, what would happen to the Board of Peace after Trump leaves office? So maybe you can talk to us about some of these concerns.
Well, that's a really good question, and I think a lot of them will be answered by what happens specifically within Gaza in the next few years. The Board of Peace is set up, it's meant to be something that addresses more than just Gaza, that's meant to stabilize different conflicts in the world, but whether or not that is possible will depend on what happens in the next few years within Gaza. And while European countries like the United Kingdom, like France, like Germany have not yet joined, they've said no to joining at this time, the door remains open for them to come in at a later point in time if they see that the Board of Peace is actually having a good effect. So this reluctance by some European countries, more traditional allies of the United States, if you will, does not mean that they won't be involved further down the road.
So how does this Board of Peace fit into the equation where the United Nations exists? Talk to us about the bigger picture here.
I think specifically when it comes to Gaza, when it comes to the West Bank, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, the United Nations has shown itself to be ineffective for many, many years, going back decades. If anything, we've seen during the war with Gaza that UNRWA, that United Nations personnel were actually involved in terrorist atrocities. We've seen that the United Nations, even with Hezbollah in Lebanon, has been facilitating the positioning of terrorists for terrorist attacks against Israel. So the United Nations has not been very effective at keeping the peace. It's kept the people of Gaza in a state of perpetual dependency on Hamas because of policies that were meant to punish Israel instead of promote the improvement of the economy. So really what we're seeing now is a different approach. We're seeing outside factors. We're seeing a new group, the Board of Peace, coming in, hopefully to succeed where the United Nations has failed. The United Nations still has a role to play in the region more generally, but when it comes to the reconstruction of Gaza and peace in the Middle East, the United Nations has not done a good job of it, and maybe it is time to see what the Board of Peace can do.
So on that point, you're saying that the United Nations has been ineffective in certain aspects. Can the Board of Peace be an alternative to the UN?
I think it absolutely can. When you look at the United Nations and its mandate, what it has really done over the years is provide aid, meaning that it enabled people to subsist, to have food and water, to have basic necessities, but not to build up their economies, not to build up a democratic country, not to thrive in the region. So the Board of Peace is dedicated towards that end. It's meant specifically to improve the lives, the conditions, the governments of the region. So that is what is fundamentally different, is this is a board that's investing serious money into uplifting the economy and the people, where the United Nations, all it did was try to keep things stable and as is.
Okay, with the time left, there's another thing I wanted to talk to you about, and that is what Vice President J.D. Vance said about Iran talks. Specifically that Iran was ignoring Washington's red lines related to its nuclear program, Iran's nuclear program. So what are Iran's intentions when it comes to its nuclear program?
I think Iran has spelled out its intentions for many years now and has played a cat and mouse game with the United States and the West. It keeps promising to come to the table and negotiate, but all it really wants is to continue developing its nuclear power, continue to enrich uranium to a point that it is almost military grade, and continue and rescind sanctions so that it can use money from the West, from sales of oil, in order to rebuild its economy, further develop its military ambitions, and provide for terror support in the region. We're not really seeing a fundamental change in Iran. The only thing that's different now is that we have the United States that is resolved to take military action if Iran does not come to an agreement. Will there be an agreement? It's hard to tell at this stage. It does not look promising, but that's not to say that they're not trying to come to an agreement.
Okay, so then what's next? If Iran is not willing to compromise enough, let's say, and Washington is holding firm on its red lines, where does that leave us?
I think that leaves us to a position where we may very well see military action against Iran. What form of military action, that remains to be seen. It can be something like we saw last summer, targeted strikes against nuclear facilities, against enrichment facilities, against the sites that are used to build ballistic missiles. But it could also be broader than that. It could target the government itself and other military installations in order to give the Iranian people the chance to rise up and take over their country. As we've seen since December, there's been a growing pressure with demonstrations and protests against the government and a brutal humanitarian crackdown that shows the people of Iran want change. So what we will see militarily can range from similar strikes to what we saw last year to a decapitation of the Iranian government so that the people could take it back.
Okay, just one final thing, Gerard. You brought up the ballistic missiles. What do you think is the likelihood that the U.S. will get Iran to limit its ballistic missiles?
Iran is always claiming that these missiles are for peaceful purposes. Believe it or not, they want to launch satellites with these missiles, which is not what they're really for. They're meant to threaten Europe and the United States more directly by developing missiles that can reach us. So I think for the United States, Iran's ability to develop ballistic missiles, to have ballistic missiles, and nuclear fuel refined beyond a certain point is a non-starter. It will continue to be a red line for the United States, and I think President Trump is in a very difficult position to cede ground on that, especially because he was so critical of the Obama-era nuclear deal, which did not really result in any change in Iran.
I just had to chuckle a little bit. You said Iran wants to use the ballistic missiles to send satellites. But anyway, great comments, Gerard, today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A senior